we have few presentations around nature-based solutions, and also we have some presentations around risk transferring and forecast-based financing in disaster risk reduction. So before we start, let me introduce the session chairs. I'm Samindi Malalgoda. I'm a senior lecturer in quantity surveying, and also I am a member of the Global Disaster Resilience Center at the University of Huddersfield, UK. And also we have Suranga with us. Suranga, would you like to say a few words?
Hello, everyone. Nice to be co-chairing this session with Chamindi. I'm Suranga Kahandava. I think many of you might know me. I have been working on disaster risk management in Sri Lanka and overall South Asia for last as a World Bank disaster risk management specialist for last 9 years. But before that, I was with the UNDP disaster risk management program after tsunami. Now I work as a senior disaster risk management specialist for Latin America and Caribbean region of the World Bank. So welcome everyone to the session, and I think we can continue with the discussion. Over to you, Chamindi.
Thanks, Suranga. Thank you. So we have 6 presenters in this session presenting at this session. So each presenter will get 10 minutes for the presentation, and after each presentation we are going to have a discussion and we'll be asking some questions, and also you will be able to ask him questions if you do have after the presentation. You can type all your questions in the chat functions. So please, if you do have any questions, please type your questions in the chat. So without taking further time, let me introduce our first speaker. Our first speaker is Chintaka Ganepola. Chintaka is from the Asian Disaster Preparedness Center, Thailand. Chintaka is going to talk about plant selection criteria for nature-based landslide risk management. Over to you, Chintaka. Are you there?
Yes, Dr. Chamindi. I think the video will be played.
All right. Okay, then let's play the video. Samat, can you play the video?
Ganepola, and I am a geoengineer working at Asian Disaster Preparedness Center. I will be speaking on the proposed plant selection criteria for nature-based landslide risk management. This work was carried out under the Nature-Based Landslide Risk Management Project in Sri Lanka, which was initiated and funded by the World Bank, implemented by National Building Research Organisation Sri Lanka, with technical assistance from Asian Disaster Preparedness Center, Thailand. The presentation consists of the following main themes. What is nature-based landslide risk management? How plants can stabilize unstable slopes? Methodology, proposed plant selection criteria, application of the criteria to pre-selected plant species, and finally, the summary. What is nature-based landslide risk management? It's a novel technique which at present gaining popularity in Asian countries such as Nepal, Bangladesh, Thailand, Hong Kong, etc. Generally, this involves use of plant species to mitigate slope instabilities, providing sustainable, cost-effective, ecologically and environmental friendly approaches for landslide disaster risk reduction. Now we will see how plants can stabilize unstable slopes. Use of plant species for erosion control has been practiced in many parts of the world for centuries. However, the application of plants for prevention and reducing the impacts of landslides is yet new to the world. Research studies carried out to date have listed the positive enhancements offered by plant species in mitigating slope instabilities. They are: roots bind soil particles, offering protection to soil surface from erosion and gullying. Roots reinforce soil layers. Root water uptake and evapotranspiration reduce soil moisture content. Plant canopy or the foliage intercepts rainfall. Having talked about the theory aspects in brief, now I will elaborate on the methodology we adopted in composing the plant selection criteria. It consists of three main stages. First, we did a systematic literature review to identify key factors from which plant species can be evaluated based on their suitability to mitigate landslide risk. Collected information, it was further refined by additional inputs and ideas from practitioners, scientists, engineers working in the field of landslide risk management. After identifying the key factors, we developed the plant selection criteria together with a marking scheme to evaluate plant species categories and rank them according to their suitability for nature-based landslide risk management. At last, we applied the criteria to a sample of pre-selected plant species from landslide-prone areas of Sri Lanka in order to evaluate its practical usage. The plant selection criteria consists of four key factors. Number one, root architecture strength characteristics. The type of root system influences in improving the slope stability. Research studies suggested that plant species having H and VH root types, they are suitable for soil reinforcement and slope protection. Plant species having higher root tensile strengths, they are better candidates for slope protection. The second factor is hydrological significance. Evapotranspiration process and rainfall interception by the foliage are the two main phenomena that contribute to lower the development of excessive moisture contents beneath the ground surface during heavy precipitation events. Plant species having higher evapotranspiration capacities and a widespread canopy, it will be excellent candidates in mitigating slope instabilities. The third is ecological significance. It is essential to have a broad understanding of the natural vegetation cover at any given location. Generally, the pioneer plant species, they grow and propagate well in degraded lands, strengthening the soil surface layers. On the other hand, introducing plant species that are not commonly found in the interested site location or non-native species may lead to cause adverse effects. A plant may have excellent bioengineering characteristics, but if it is an invasive plant for a particular region, the overall effectiveness of that particular species may not be beneficial. The fourth factor is economic value. An economic condition in the selection criteria that can recognize the value of the plant to be established would provide a win-win situation where nature-based solutions protect the rural community livelihoods while also contributing to manage the landslide risk effectively. A marking scheme was compiled to evaluate different plant species categories: grasses, herbs, shrubs, and trees, and rank them according to their suitability for nature-based landslide risk management. Each factor, it was given marks based on a scale of 4. This table presents the marks given for different categories under each factor. This diagram describes the proposed plant selection criteria. After doing the evaluation against the 4 factors, a cumulative index, it was calculated using the equation which is highlighted at the bottom of the diagram. The index, it was based on a scale of 4. A cumulative index greater than 2 and the compatibility with the ecoclimatic region, they were considered when selecting plant species for landslide prone sites. This plant selection criteria, it was applied to pre-selected sample consisting of 33 commonly found plant species from landslide prone areas. Among the 33 plant species, those which obtained highest numerical index They are presented here under the categories of grasses, shrubs, and trees. This table presents the grass species. Among the investigated species, Arundodonx and Bambusa vulgaris obtained the highest score. They both possess high to medium evapotranspiration capacity and dense fibrous roots which penetrate to a moderate depth. Moving on to shrubs, Jatropha curcas and Bitex negunto are the best performers among the shrubs. In the category of trees, Theobroma cacova, Glycidia sapium, and Macaranga peltata, they were the best candidate trees to be used in nature-based landslide risk management practices. Before concluding, I wish to bring up a summary of my presentation. You'll have seen that the proposed plant selection criteria uses 4 main key factors: root architecture, root strength, hydrological significance, ecological significance, and the economic value. This criteria, it will be a very useful tool in ranking and determining suitable plant species for nature-based landslide risk management techniques. However, the expert knowledge and input of a botanist or an ecologist is recommended at the time of collection of information under each of the listed key factors, as this would enable a very effective plant species evaluation for nature-based landslide risk management. Finally, on behalf of all the co-authors, I wish to acknowledge Dr. Asire Karunawardena, Director General NPRO, for his guidance, and the World Bank for providing financial support for the study. We also would like to thank the symposium organizers for providing this opportunity to present our study. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chintaka. It's a very interesting presentation, and I'm quite aware of the work. Yeah, so great presentation. So we can open for questions. We can take few questions, and if anyone has questions, please come in.
It's a very interesting presentation, Chintaka. Thank you very much for the interesting presentation. Can I ask a quick question about the scoring system? Can you explain how did you come up with the scoring system?
The scoring system, it's more of a qualitative thing, and till now a lot of expert judgment is there. That's why I mentioned in the last slide that the inputs from a botanist or an ecologist, it will be vital for the for in order to score those characteristics in a scale of 1 to 4. So like we put 0, the scoring system goes from 0 to 4, and 0 for the characteristics which are poor, and 4 for the characteristics which are which will be higher. And I must say that this is a very interesting research area, and the research is ongoing now. And I also would like to make a small announcement, if you would permit, that we are having a plenary session tomorrow at 16 hours. So the plenary session is called Nature-Based Solutions for a Resilient Future. And in that plenary session, there will be key experts talking on more about on these themes. And there will be a more detailed presentation on the plant selection criteria, especially for nature-based landslide risk management. So I would like to extend a kind invitation for all of the who are present here in this technical session to have a visit tomorrow at 16 for the plenary session. Thank you.
Thanks, Chintaka. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Any other questions? I see on the chat box there is a question. Have you also focused on coastal regions aspects apart from focusing on landslide affected regions? So I think this presentation was purely on the nature-based landslide solution. You have any reflections on any coastal nature-based work, Chintaka? If you are aware of, you can come in.
Yeah, well, the research what we have done is mainly it's purely on landslide risk management. So if you are focusing on coastal regions, I think the mangrove species it's a better plant which will reduce the coastal erosion and will protect the areas of those coastal regions. But the research what I have presented here, it's mainly focused on for landslide disaster risk reduction.
I'm aware of some of the work Moroto University was doing post tsunami on, in collaboration with PARI Japan on the energy attenuation of the mangroves and stuff. There are some really interesting presentations you can, I think, read online also. Professor Samantha Tiarachi was one of the co-authors. He had a lot of work done on this area, on the coastal. Any other questions? Samindi, should we move to the second presenter?
Yeah.
Okay, let's move on.
Let me introduce our second presenter. Before that, thank you very much, Chintaka, for the interesting presentation. So let me introduce our second presenter. Our second presenter is Zinzar Saruk. He's from International Union for Conservation of Nature, Sri Lanka. The topic is a conceptual framework for community-led ecosystem-based disaster risk reduction. Over to you, Zinzar.
Good afternoon, everybody. We are going to present a conceptual model for community-driven ecosystem-based disaster risk reduction. So, as you know, mainstreaming disaster risk reduction in ecosystem-based approaches require multi-sector and multi-stakeholder engagement. A better conceptual model, improved understanding of ecosystem, and it will improve the engagement, community engagement, and it will be used for innovative spatial tools and decision making. So aim of this study is to develop a conceptual model to support more robust understanding of community-driven ecosystem-based disaster risk reduction and contribute to the innovative literature in disaster risk reduction. As you know, a substantial number of policies, institutions, and processes, which includes tools, approaches, systems, legislation, and technical frameworks have been developed over the years in Sri Lanka. Some focuses on specific aspects of disaster risk reduction, others focusing on specific sectors, such as environment, agriculture, land management, disaster management, coastal management, natural resource management, and community empowerment. Or it is focusing on specific groups within the society, such as children, youth, women, elderly, or disabled populations. And some are tailored to specific institution. The existing isolated models are mostly sector specific, however, can be useful to develop an inclusive but adaptable framework for ecosystem-based disaster reduction. In this context, this study presents a conceptual model and interlinkages of key domains within influencing factors and result areas of a community-driven ecosystem-based disaster risk reduction process developed in Sri Lanka for future operationalization. So, study used a multi-method data collection methods including compilation of 11 literature, qualitative information gathered from secondary data sources, and we also conducted 22 key informant interviews and 8 social learning workshops. We partnered with, we were supported by the IUCN, Child Fund, and University of Colombo for this study. So this is the model we have proposed. We have named it as a Rubik cubic shape model since the domains, inference effectors, and result areas discussed in this model have inter and inter relationship and overlaps. This model have 4 key domains. It includes development planning, climate change adaptation, disaster risk reduction, and ecosystem management. And it also have key 4 influencing factors that include socio-political setting, risk perception of communities, community institutional arrangements, laws, and policies. It's have 4 result areas, including increased human security, improve sustainable livelihoods, strengthening resilience, ensure environmental sustainability. As shown in this figure, all domains and influence factors and result areas have interlinkages. That's why we have named it as Rubik cubic model. Although disaster risk reduction, ecosystem management, development planning, and climate change adaptation domains have specific modalities of work and target isolated intervention, they are closely interrelated to each other. These domains all seek the primary goals of sustainable development, human well-being, and human security. Hence, the ecosystem model can be further expanded to include influencing factors and result areas interconnected to each of the 4 domains areas. Each domain areas is influenced by a factor is called an influencing factor. The influence factors are interrelated and interdependent, which reinforce and it also reinforces with each other. When it's come to result areas, we have identified 4 result areas as I mentioned earlier. So, especially human security, like protection of life, free from injuries, freedom from fear, access to basic needs, and improved health and well-being could be ensured through these influencing factors. Then the second result area is sustainable livelihood. It will ensure uninterrupted livelihoods with continuous supply of inputs, store and marketing facilities. Then the third influencing result areas is community resilience. It will help us to ensure ability of community to utilize its resources and use development planning to better respond for disaster and climate change impacts. Then the fourth result area is environmental sustainability. It helps us to prevent environmental degradation, and it also allows for long-term ecological quality. Then the institution involved in each of the 4 key domains areas have their own specific mandates, implementation plan, and stakeholders. However, they are closely interrelated. They are related to overarching goals of human security, sustainable livelihood, community resilience, environmental sustainability. This arrangement allows different organizations responsibility for different domain areas to utilize same set of tools for achieving their goals, especially the result areas we have discussed. Available ecosystem-based tools and related main activities are listed here. This could be expanded, but based on our project, the research experience and the literature survey, we have compiled these tools. So this could be used as an input tools to the model we have discussed. This include integrated water management, integrated forest management, integrated land use management, integrated coastal zone management, integrated fire management, and some general tools. So as a concluding remarks, in general, the domains areas are not mainstream with the function of local governments. The local governance agencies have a vital role in domain areas when it comes to community-based disaster risk reduction. Adopt a community participatory approach for their development planning process to ensure incorporation of concerns related to 4 domains in the ECO-DRR model developed in the study. Further research is required to draw lesson from applying the set of result areas we have discussed and relevant tools identified in this study to improve the model. As a set of indicators for each of the result areas need to be developed to further validate the effectiveness of ecosystem-based DRR policies and tools for practical application at the community level. These indicators should be accompanied by multi-level decision-making mechanism to help all key domains stakeholders to prioritize the policy enforcement activities, monitor the progress, and evaluate the implementation of the targeted intervention. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sihan. I think it's a very interesting presentation. So you try to set up a kind of a sustainable, community involved resilience model. So I think it has a lot of aspects that you need to look into when you design, a specific investment in particular. So I think I will open up for questions. Colleagues, if you have any questions, you can ask, and you can also type in the chat box. Any questions? All right, you can, we can try to have a few minutes towards the end of the session also if you have anything missed. Samindi, should we proceed? And thank you very much, Sihan, and your team for this interesting work. And, thank you very much for the presentation.
Yeah, thank you, Sihan, for the interesting presentation. So let's move on to our next presenter. Our next presenter is Ravi Sangapille. Ravi is from the Disaster Management Center, Sri Lanka. And Ravi is going to talk about contribution of nature protection in reducing disaster risk in Jaffna district, Sri Lanka, with special reference to natural sand dunes in Vadamarachi, East Sri Lanka. Shall we now Chintak, shall we play Ravi's presentation?
Welcome to my presentation. I am going to talk about contribution of nature protection on the disaster risk reduction in the Jaffna district. It is a special reference to natural resources of the sand dunes in the Vadamarachi East. This is my presentation outline. First, we move on introduction. Northeast part of the Jaffna district represent the sandy area. Major part of the sandy area are sand dunes. Sand dunes represent from Manatkatu to Sundikula in the Vadamarachi East area. Sand dune is a mound of the sand. This is the formed by the wind, usually along the beach or in a desert. Dunes formed when the wind blows sand into the sheltered area behind an obstacle. Sand dunes and associated vegetation have been contributing continuously, reducing the impact from the natural disaster such as tsunami and flooding. The sand dune and associated vegetation is a major barrier to protecting the area from impact of the natural disaster. This is the view of sand dunes in the Vadamarachi East area. This is a study area of Vadamarachi East. Basically, this area sandy. It's so clearly showing. This is also a study area of the Vadamarachi East. It represents the sand distribution by Kiramalladari division wise. This table represents sand dunes distributed in the Kiramalladari divisions of the Vadamarachi East, the study area. The impact of sand mining on the disaster risk reduction have never been evaluated properly due to the 3-decade-long civil war. The object of the present study to identify the impact of sand removal on the risk of disaster. This diagram shows the importance of the sand dunes in the Vadamarachi East, how to protect the people from the natural disaster. For many years, these resources are being subjected for uncontrollable and illegal sand mining. As a result, these resources has lost their value and capacity to protect the people from natural disaster. Let me move on methodology. For the purpose of this study, field survey was used as a method for the identifying removal area. These areas were mapped by using the ArcGIS and open source QGIS. The area has been located by using the GPS. Sand permit detail were collected from the Divisional Secretary of Marudangani. 10 years rainfall data were collected and analyzed. Impact of tsunami in 2004 also were collected as a secondary sources. This table represents mean annual rainfall of the Vadamarachi East area. This area received high rainfall during the period which marked in the diagram. During this period, this area received high rainfall, but there are no any other flooding effect because of the distribution of the sand dunes. Now we move on the result and discussion part. From 96 to 2005, sand mining had been based on the environmental friendly manner. 2005 to 2009, sand mining activity had been limited because of the war. 2009 to 2015, illegal and uncontrollable sand mining activity undertaken. 2015 to 2020, sand mining with the permission under the supervision. So very large scale sand dunes have removed in the Amban and Kudathane area during the period of 2009 to 2015. Sand mining activity are being undertaken in the area such as Manakkadu, Amban, Kudathane and Nagargol area. This map represents the marked area continuously subjected for sand mining for many years. Impact of sand removal on the disaster of the study area. Manakkadu, Kudathane and Amban area already faced the flooding effect. As a result of the sand removal, the removed area already lost the vegetation. There will be chances for the effect from the storm and wind and high risk by the tsunami wave. As a result of the removal, is cause for the loss of the habitat, which impact the biodiversity, and finally the groundwater quality. Excessive mining activity goes for the seawater intrusion because the dunes are very close to deep sea. These are the examples for the large amount of sand removed from the particular area, Kudathane. This is another example for the sand mining activity ongoing in the large dune. This slide represents sand mining area and its impact. The cleared area of the sand dunes causes for the potential of the flooding. So this picture clearly shows the effect of the flooding. This is another example for the flooding and the loss of the vegetation and the natural beauty by the sand removal. The study revealed that highly density area of sand dunes and associated vegetation contribute on the risk reduction from the tsunami, flood, and storm. Deaths more than below 700 and other damages are low in the sand dunes available area compared to sand dune not available area such as Thaledi to Kattekadu. There were no any other risk in the opposite side of dunes. The area from the Thaledi to Kattekadu are sandy, but there are no any specific dunes, and as a result of this area were highly affected by tsunami. This area had deaths over 500 and large number of houses were also damaged. This map clearly shows how to sand dunes protect the residential area from the tsunami impact. The marked area so that illegal and uncontrollable sand mining activity are take place. So this map clearly says that sand dunes act as a natural barrier and save the people from the tsunami impact and other natural disasters such as flooding and storm. This is the important map. 3 zones are shown in the map. First zone represents the sand dunes area, which are distributed from Manakad to Maradangani. During the tsunami time, these dunes had protected people from the tsunami waves. Second zone represents the sandy area, but no sand dune found there, which are distributed from Thaledi to Kattekad. During the tsunami time, this area had highly affected by tsunami waves. Third zone represents Sundikulam area. Very few people living there. It is continuous sandbar, which are associated with the vegetation. It is very close to the sea. It also protects the area from the tsunami waves. Now we move on the result and discussion part. From 96 to 2005, sand mining had been based on the environmental friendly manner. 2005 to 2009, sand mining activity had been limited because of the war. 2009 to 2015, illegal and uncontrollable sand mining activity undertaken. 2015 to 2020, sand mining with the permission under the supervision. So very large scale sand dunes had removed in the Amban and Kudathane area during the period of 2009 to 2015. Sand mining activity, I come to the conclusion. The study concludes that sand dunes and associated vegetation are major natural protection system to prevent the impact of disaster. Gaps in the legal system and institutional arrangement impact the protection of sand dunes. Integrated institutional arrangement, ensuring the legal measures, public awareness, environmental friendly project are major strategy to protect the natural resources like sand dunes, and it reduce the disaster impact. This paper emphasized that the government of Sri Lanka need to ensuring the provision of resources and funds towards a planned activity policy, law and regulation, channeling for the disaster risk reduction for the resilience through the environmental conservation. Therefore, the environmental conservation is considered as an effective and efficient methodology for the disaster risk reduction in the Jaffna district. Thank you.
Thank you, Ravi, for the very eye-opening presentation. I think we can open for discussion. We already have a question on the chat box. What are the steps taken to prevent uncontrolled sand mining in the area? That's question number 1. And then there's another question. Could you please elaborate the criteria considered for issuance of permits? I think the 2 questions are interrelated. Ravi, if you are connected, you can take the 2 questions.
Suranga, I think Ravi is not connected, but
is there anyone else from the team? Unfortunately, it seems like Ravi is not. Okay, sorry, colleagues. I think, is there anyone who can shed some light on that one? There may be, I see there are some coastal engineers connected. So if you can have some, awareness of this one, you can comment, or we can move on to the next presentation. I think the contacts should be available, so you can get in touch with Ravi bilaterally over email. Yeah. Hello?
Yeah, Suranga. Yes, actually, the sand mining is a huge issue in Sri Lanka because it's not a renewable resource, and hence we have to have proper approach, kind of low sand culture. We have to move away from sand because one day it will be a huge crisis in Sri Lanka if we mine at this rate.
Thank you very much. For those who don't know, that was Mr. Bandula Vikramarachchi, who used to be a chief engineer. Sorry if I got the designation wrong. He was one of the well-known coastal engineers in Sri Lanka. Was very instrumental in doing the coastal erosion hazard maps for Sri Lanka, and I think he's now a kind of a technical consultant for the Asian Disaster Preparedness Center. So thanks, Mr. Bandula, for your insights. Thank you. Chamindi, should we move on to the next presentation?
Yes, Surang, let me introduce our next presenter. Our next presenter is Shavindri Nisanka. Shavindri is a researcher at the University of Huddersfield, UK. And Shavindri is going to talk about what is disaster resilient properties. Over to you, Shavindri. Chamath, can we play the presentation, please?
A very good day to all of you. The topic of my presentation is disaster resilience properties in the built environment discourse. I am Shavindra Nisanka from Global Disaster Resilience Center, University of Huddersfield, UK. This is the content of my presentation. First of all, let me introduce you what are disaster resilience properties. Simply, in science, property means a characteristic or trait that you can use to describe a matter by observation, measurement, or combination. In other words, properties refers to the underlying characteristics of a given context. So let me ask you like this. How do you explain disaster resilience? How do you see it? How do you observe it? How do you measure resilience? Is it transparent? Is it soft? Is it hard? What are the characteristics that you can identify whether there is disaster resilience in a given context or there is no resilience in a given context? So in answering this question, I am going to look at what are the disaster resilience properties. So then, since disaster resilience is a vast subject area, I selected the built environment discourse. There are several reasons for selecting the built environment discourse. Boscher identifies disaster risk reduction and built-in resilience as two major components of the bigger umbrella of disaster risk management. So built-in resilience is where the point where the disaster resilience comes into the picture. And built-in resilience can be identified and denominated as a quality of the built environment and further elaborated as the ability to adapt to existing and emergent threats, and this ability varies through physical, institutional, economic, and social dimensions. Then the next reason for selecting the built environment is that it is made up of man-made structures and it often constitutes the weakest links and will turn out to be the most dangerous places during disasters. Then I investigated what is the role of the built environment in embedding disaster resilience. Then I found out in previous studies that they have established 6 multiple societal roles of the built environment in embedding disaster resilience. And these 6 multiple roles are construct, develop, stimulate, facilitate, protect, and nurture. Then one might ask a question, if you want to make a given context disaster resilient, what do you need to construct? What do you need to develop? So I think you will find the answer for this question at the end of this presentation. So after all these background studies, I established my study area as what are the disaster resilient properties in the context of the built environment. The research methodology adopted for this study is a mapping review, which is alternatively named as a descriptive review. The specific methodology adopted is mainly identified to map out and categorize existing literature on selected areas and contextualize in-depth systematic reviews. Furthermore, this methodological approach will determine the extent to which a body of literature on disaster resilience properties and associated terminologies reveals any interpretable patterns to the pre-existing propositions, theories, methodologies, and findings. So moving on to the studies. During the first stage of my study, I directly referred to all the previous research and studies that referred to the terminology, the keyword search of a disaster resilient property. So one of the main studies I found out during my study is by Bruno in 2003, and he has come up with 4 main disaster resilient properties. And afterwards, it can be seen that many authors have used this Bruno's 4 resilient properties as the basis for their studies. However, I was able to come up with a list of resilient properties referred to in different studies in different contexts relating to built environment. Then I also noticed during the first stage of my study that the same factors referred or identified as resilience properties have been categorized under different other terminologies by various other authors. For instance, the same robustness factor has been identified under resilient dimensions, resilience principles, or attributes of resilience. So, in finalizing all these factors and the associated terminologies, I was able to come up with a conceptual framework. And this is the conceptual framework. I identified 6 main underlying characteristics, and these were able to summarize the meaning of disaster resilience basically. And I have placed these main resilient properties outside the circle, as you can see, and the other sub characteristics which are also covered under the domain of the main 6 disaster resilience properties are placed inside the circle. So this is the conceptual framework based on the previous studies and my descriptive mapping I developed for the disaster resilience properties. So now let me move on to explain the main resilient properties I have identified outside the circle. The first resilient property is participative capacity. The participative capacity is a system's ability to change its own structures to interventions by other systems. During a hazard, maybe a flood or earthquake, a system, maybe a building structure, needs to be able to change its own structure so that it will not collapse during a hazardous situation. You can see examples during a flood situation, during an earthquake situation. We have to make the structures in a way that they are flexible to change with the movements so that more disruptions will not affect the functionality of the system. Then the second factor is adaptive capacity. Adaptive capacity is a property of a system in which structures are modified to prevent future disasters. As you can see, after one disaster, we have identified that it's a disaster-prone area. So you need to do the proper hazard risk assessments and vulnerability mapping, and you need to make sure the elements of the built environment in that area is modified and retrofitted to prevent future disasters. Then the third factor is the coping capacity. The coping capacity refers to the capacity to identify problems, establish priorities, and mobilize resources when conditions exist that threaten to disrupt some element, system, or other unit of analysis. During an emergency situation, the rescue teams, the emergency evacuation routes needs to be established, and how the priorities need to be made. The priority might be saving the lives of the people. So these priorities need to be made, and you should have access roads and ways to mobilize resources so that the human lives and maybe the priorities coming up next can be saved and the devastation can be minimized during a disaster. Then the fourth factor is robustness. Robustness is the ability to maintain desired characteristics of the system despite the changes to the system. So, as we all know, there will be severe disruptions during a natural hazard. However, you need to have backup plans so that the main functions of the system will be still happening even in the event of a disaster. Then the fifth factor is redundancy. Redundancy is the extent to which the elements or the subunits of a system are substitutable and capable of satisfying the functional requirements even in the event of a disruption. As you can see, a simple example, you need to have 2 underground pipes. If one is destructed, you have another one as a backup during a hazardous situation. Then moving on to the final one, it's rapidity. However much you have things in place, however precautions you have taken, the capacity to meet priorities and achieve the goals in a timely manner is essential during a hazardous situation. As you can see, early warning systems, on-time actions need to make sure that you save the lives and minimize the disruption during a disaster. So finally, I have linked my conceptual framework of disaster resilient properties with the 6 roles of the built environment in making a given context disaster resilient. So if one can construct adaptive capacity, develop robustness, stimulate rapidity, then that context can be made disaster resilient and a safe and sound place for all of us. So I think this framework can be used. This surely needs to be verified by empirical evidence and need to be developed further so that it can be a basis for the future disaster resilient pathway in the built environment discourse. Thanks a lot for listening to my presentation.
Thank you very much, Shavendri, for your interesting presentation. So I think you try to conceptualize different parameters in the built environment that contributes to the resilience. I think it's a great effort. I see a lot of deep diving possible along this conceptual framework you proposed. So we can open up for questions. Anybody having questions, please come in. And you can also type your questions on the chat box.
Shavindri, I have one question for you. Are you focusing on one particular disaster or are you looking at this on a multi-hazard perspective?
Yes, Dr. Samindi, I think, hello, I think you can hear me.
Yeah, we can hear you.
It's on a multi-hazard perspective because actually these factors were not synthesized focusing on one disaster because actually going through all the existing studies that is available on the internet and from the libraries, I think these were the factors I was able to synthesize covering all the hazardous situations. So, but I mostly related to the terminology disaster resilient properties as well as the associated other factors. So I think it's a multi-hazard approach.
Thanks, Shavindri.
I think we have a question on the chat box. Gayan Vedavat, how can we account for issues like place-based characteristics within your framework?
I think place-based characteristics refers to the risk that are associated with specific locations. And I think that during my presentation, things like the adaptive capacity, like after one hazardous situation takes place, I think if we are to upgrade the existing built environment in that context to avoid future losses or future disruptions, you need to do the proper hazard mapping. And improving the adaptive capacity does not refer to improving the adaptive capacity on a blanket basis. You need to cater the requirement of that specific location. So you need to identify the risk in that certain area and then develop plans based on the localized risk levels.
Thank you, Gayan, for your questions. Any more questions? Should we move on, Samindi?
Yeah. Yes,
If there are no more questions, thank you very much, Shavindri, for your presentation. And over to you, Samindi, for the next presentation.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Shavindri, for the interesting presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Samindi.
So let me introduce our next presenter. Our next presenter is Danushika Seneviratna. Danushika is from the University of Colombo, and she's going to talk about, her topic is an evaluation of existing natural disaster risk insurance in Sri Lanka. Over to you, Danushika.
Good evening, you all. I'm HSED Seneviratna from Department of Geography, University of Colombo. I am going to present the study about an evaluation of existing natural disaster risk insurances in Sri Lanka. I have divided my presentation into parts. At the very first beginning, I will go through the introduction part. Global warming led by climate change has intensified the occurrence of disastrous events in the world. Global professionals in disaster risk reduction are doing their best to ensure that cities are resilient through mitigation and preparedness strategies. However, the response and recovery sectors need strategies in order to cope up with the devastating impacts of natural disasters, since the limited fiscal capacity slow the recovery process. Sri Lanka, as a country prone to natural disasters, lack the financial backup required for the disaster recovery stage. So it is not always the government's responsible to rebuild everything after natural disaster. However, the community should be responsible for their own recovery. They have to have their own recovery plan. Natural disaster insurance schemes can support this recovery process by aiding the local communities with necessary financial backup. The main objective of this study is to evaluate the existing natural disaster insurances in Sri Lanka. To fulfill this objective, secondary data were used. Insurance companies in Sri Lanka were considered to identify the disaster insurance schemes in Sri Lanka. Insurance companies licensed to carry on insurance business by Insurance Regulatory Commission of Sri Lanka was selected for this study. Information such as insurance categories, policies, natural disaster risk consideration were collected through insurance companies' websites. Qualitative and descriptive data analysis methods were used to evaluate the existing disaster risk insurances in Sri Lanka. Now let's move on to the results of the study. There are two classes of insurance when considering insurance companies in Sri Lanka. Those are long-term insurance class and general insurance class. Long-term insurance is carrying out the life insurance and different categories regarding the lifetime events for long term. It appropriates 53% of the insurance companies in Sri Lanka. Marriage, health, child's education, retirement, and family protection are included under long-term insurance scheme. General insurances, which take 47% of existing insurance companies in Sri Lanka, cover different kinds of insurance categories such as motor insurance, miscellaneous, fire, motorcycle, three-wheeler, marine, home, business, personal, health, crop, and fire. When considering the natural disaster coverage, long-term life insurance generally provides protection for a set period of time, while permanent insurance such as whole and universal life provides lifetime coverage. In life insurance, policyholder die due to natural disaster, its benefits can be taken by his family regarding the comprehensive policies. Health insurance is also the same. However, there is no significant category for natural disaster in long-term insurances. Natural disaster risk coverage include categories has been evaluated by considering the insurance company's policies. The research shows that 9 out of 14 general insurance companies cover natural disaster risk under the categories like motor insurance, home insurance, business insurance, enterprises insurance, and cultivation insurance. The percentage is shown in the figure 2. Proportion of subcategories with natural disaster risk coverage has been calculated to identify the more required category for natural disaster risk coverage. Motor insurance is the most required category for natural disaster risk coverage, and one insurance company could be highlighted with the different themes to cover natural disaster risk, such as protect farmers, small and medium enterprises, complete protection plan for businesses. Actually, these are additional to the existing above mentioned categories. Now we are at the characteristic of natural disaster coverage. Additional payments for natural catastrophic events can be identified through the insurance companies. When the policyholder wants to reduce the premium insurance, just cut off the additional fee for natural disaster risk coverage. Actually, this kind of situation makes policyholder difficult due to less coverage capacity. In other hand, this kind of policies might be valuable for someone who is not in the natural disaster risk area. Some insurance companies use conditions for natural disasters such as providing fire insurance including the risk coverage of lightning while excluding the risk under earthquake, volcanic eruption or other convulsions of nature. Actually, with this situation, government contribution is very important. In 2016, the government of Sri Lanka established the National Natural Disaster Insurance Scheme to protect its uninsured population against natural disaster. It covered damage caused to uninsured lives and properties, households, and small businesses establishments due to natural disasters. And also, Agriculture and Agrarian Insurance Board has implemented a crop insurance schemes and aim to protect those affected against loss of income due to natural hazards. The protection is provided against the losses caused by drought, inadequate water, excess water, flood, pest attack, disease outbreaks, and wild animal attacks. The crop insurance is based on the type of crop, mode of irrigation, and the degree of risk to particular natural disaster. The enrollee has to pay a certain percentage of the insurance as the premium depending on the magnitude of the risk, and the compensation payment depends on the premium paid by the farmer. And also, crop insurers have become a necessity when farmers apply for agricultural loans for the banks. Now I am going to conclude the study. Overall, natural disaster risk is considered by the insurance companies in Sri Lanka. General insurance schemes carry out the natural disaster risk coverage as the subcategory of the main insurance coverage. Disaster risk insurance is basically included with the insurance policy, whether it is wanted or not. Has encouraged to establish the natural disaster insurance schemes, and also companies are reluctant to provide the services for natural disaster risk due to financial instability among the communities. Now I am going to recommend there is a significant room for improvement in the insurance sector based on better location analytics. Such measurements would require further research into preparedness capacities and the requirement of the affected communities. And also, most of the companies collect information about the natural disaster risk of the customer through the application form. On behalf of that, if the companies can use the digital solution like using an app with the location, it would be helpful to identify the exact location. And also, then the risk can be calculated using the risk model regarding the risk of the area. And also, better to identify the specific natural disaster categories to implement the insurance scheme and develop the insurance scheme for those. Flood insurance can be as the example for it. These are the references I have used. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Danushika, for the presentation. I think we should appreciate your interest in the risk insurance aspects. I think that's one of the areas we have been trying so hard in Sri Lanka to kind of promote, and there are a lot more work to be done. So I think our chair has a question. I assume the insurance companies need to have access to the risk maps to determine the insurance premiums. Are those available for the whole country? I think that's one of the questions we have. So I can read out the second question also. I believe insurance company at the registering point, they just explained the natural disasters. Explain the natural disaster risk coverage. However, in the condition that they have put unreachable condition to enter the coverage, therefore experiencing those situations. Long question. People are not moving to get the coverage. How you think government role to push people for getting insurance? I think one was on the risk information available, which is critical for insurance companies to determine the premiums. The other was how the government can promote people basically buying insurance. Over to you, Danushika.
Sorry, there is another question. I think the first question, you did read out the first question.
Yes. Okay. How can affordability of insurance be sustained for vulnerable groups? I think that's a very important question. Is there a public-private partnership? So there were three questions. Danushika, you can come in.
Yes, hope you all can hear me. Thank you so much for the questions. And I will go one by one. Yes, actually, we can identify vulnerable groups. There are different vulnerable groups according to the different disasters, actually. Mainly, we can focus about the flood vulnerable group. So yeah, there is a public-private partnership, but we have to make it more strong. And also there are risk maps, but when I'm considering about the private sector, private insurance companies, they just only get the information from the insurees. Are you in risk area or not? It's just just in an application. It's a paper. So if we can go more than that, I mean that if we can make it digital, it will be more valuable. And also, yes, government role, when considering the government role to push people for getting insurance, actually I did this study as a desk study. I'm doing this further, and also when I'm studying this more, when we are going to people side, because they all are low income people. So if we are, if the private sector is going to give them insurance, first of all, we have to consider how they can afford that. Therefore, government role is very important at that side, and also governments also needs to push people for getting insurance. Thank you.
Samindi, I don't know whether we have time. We are running out of time. There were a couple of other questions. Can we go for that, or should we proceed? I think there was a question. Do the individual policies take into account NNDIP? I think it's NNEIS cover for the residual risk, or is there a duplication? I think it refers to the government insurance scheme that Sri Lanka had. Do you have the question is not at least clear to me. So you have Dhanushika, you have a answer for that?
Yeah, when we consider the government push, actually, yes, there are so many areas, not only fisheries, actually, agriculture and agrarian insurance board is also one of it. Yes, government is doing well on this, but when we consider the private sector, we have to push them as well to address this problem.
I think one of the most important thing is Sri Lanka has to develop a national disaster risk financing and insurance strategy. So a lot of governments are moving towards a kind of a comprehensive strategy for disaster risk financing and insurance. So I mean, risk financing has many other aspects. I think that can be a whole different discussion. So I think in the interest of time, let's move on. Congratulations, Dhanushika, for your interest and a very good review of the current system. And over to you, Samindi. We can move into the next presentation. Unfortunately, I had to jump to another call. I cannot avoid that. So probably I have to disconnect in 3 minutes. So please excuse me. It was wonderful to join this session. Samindi, sorry, I have to disconnect from this one.
No problem, Suranga, no problem, and thank you for your.
Thank you very much, everyone, for your interest and all your comments.
Okay, so now let's move on to our next presenter. Our next presenter is Mahesh Senanayaka. Mahesh is from the University of Colombo, and also he's doing his PhD at the University of Huddersfield, UK. Mahesh is going to talk about incorporating accountability into disaster risk governance. Thomas, can we play Mahesh's presentation, please?
Good evening, everybody. I'm going to present my PhD proposal, which is on incorporating accountability into disaster governance, a case study of Sri Lanka. Let me share my screen with you. First, this is my organization of the presentation. I will go straight to the next slide, which is defining disaster. According to United Nations International Strategy for Disaster Risk Reduction, disaster is a serious disruption of functioning of a community or a society involving widespread human, material, economic, or environmental losses and impact which exceed the ability of the affected community or the society to cope using its own resources. In considering the definitions, interpretation found in the literature, I have identified a number of interesting features of disaster. Be it man-made, natural, or otherwise, disaster has grave consequences with mass fatalities, structural, environmental, or economic causes, disrupt the functioning of community or the society, and if the impact exceeds the ability of the affected party to cope with their own resources or capacities, it needs immediate and emergency relief with the outside support. We'll move to the next slide. That discusses about the disaster risk reduction. According to United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction, disaster risk reduction is aimed at preventing new and reducing existing disaster risk and managing residual risk, all of which contribute to strengthening resilience and therefore the achievement of sustainable development. The relationship between the disaster risk reduction and Sendai framework discusses goals, aims about the disaster risk reduction. And multidimensional aspect of disaster risk reduction. Disaster risk reduction is a multidimensional aspect, multidimensional phenomena in respect of the affect, causes, the remedies to recover, and the responsibilities involved are concerned. This Sendai framework has fixed a guiding principle which discusses the multidimensional phenomenon of the disaster governance. Disaster risk governance is a process that governs the entire process related to disaster activities and which requires the involvement of multiple stakeholders in horizontally and vertically. Priority 2 of the Sendai framework discusses about the strengthening disaster risk governance to manage disaster risk. Accountability is the most important part of the disaster risk governance. According to United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction, they accept that the accountability become a key element of the disaster risk reduction governance and clearly contribute to reducing existing risk and preventing the emergence of new ones. The key elements that comes together in the notion of accountability are answerability, enforcement, and responsiveness. Sendai framework further discusses about the accountability. They outline that the accountability of multiple layers of stakeholders has become a critical factor in the achievement of 7 global targets and the reduction of disaster risk as an expected outcome of the framework. When we discuss about the Sri Lankan context, the Sri Lankan government has been in the process of developing an institutionalized disaster management framework since 1996. It was 2004 that the Indian Ocean tsunami attack forced to give additional attention of the authorities to work with more priority to set up an operating mechanism together with an institutional and legal framework towards work with the hazard situation in Sri Lanka. These are the policies and frameworks that was introduced in Sri Lanka, and these are the institutions. Apart from this institution, there are a lot of ministries, the ground level organizations are involved with the disaster governance process. With this background, I identified the research gap as although the Sri Lankan policy, legal and institutional framework appears as a comprehensive system of disaster risk governance, it shows a deficiency in operationalizing and implementing those in the real life conditions. Among the reasons for this deficiency, literature reveals that accountability is a major challenge in Sri Lankan disaster risk governance process. For example, medieval state of Badulla, Elagipitiya and Pallibagi villages of Aranayaka, 2004 tsunami resettlement related issues, more related displacements, issues related to shared responsibility among central government, provincial governments, and local governments, issues related to involvement of multiple policies and institutions are among them. With this background, this research aims to establish a governance structure in order to bring accountability into disaster risk governance in Sri Lanka that competent with the post-2015 international development. There are 4 research objectives of this research, and there are 4 research questions. Then I will discuss about the methodology. Methodology is the most important part of the research. And I have selected Saunders Research Onion Model as the research model, where they discuss 6 layers from philosophy to techniques. First layer of the philosophy discusses about the philosophical stance of the research, ontological stance, epistemological stance, and axiological stance. My ontological position of this research is subjective. The researcher believes that there is a reality beyond the object. That reality or the social phenomena are creation of social actors and subject to their perspectives, ideas, perception, vision, and intuition or logic. Disaster governance is not an independent phenomena, therefore it needs to understand with the behavior of the social actors. Epistemological stance of this research will be interpreters. And the axiological stance of the proposed research is value-laden due to given reasons. Research approach may be deductive or inductive. This research approach is inductive. Inductive approach, researcher needs to collect data, analyze, and interpret them to establish a new theory. The researcher will approach from specific to general. Research strategy, I have selected case study strategy. Saunders model suggests another 5 or 6 strategies which can be used in the research. For example, experiment, survey, case study, Excel research, grounded theory, ethnography, and archival research. Among them, I have selected case study research because of a number of reasons, as I mentioned here. Since the time constraints, I am not going to explain everything, but if time allows, we can discuss these things at the time and questions and answers time. Jin introduces a trilogy of case study research, which means case study research refers to the mode of inquiry, case studies refers to the method of inquiry, and case or the cases refers to the unit of inquiry. Unit of analysis. This research will employ multiple case embedded research. I have selected Ratnapura, Hambantota, and Colombo district as cases. Within that case, there are subunits I have identified. For example, policy, legal, and institutional frameworks, administrative officers who contribute the governance of those policies, laws, and frameworks, the political authority who makes the laws, policies, and frameworks, other stakeholders such as general public, beneficiaries, different level of government, private businesses, professional groups, civil society organizations, academics, researchers, and media. Methodological choice. This research will employ mixed method as the methodological choice, since the research need qualitative data such as opinion, perceptions, documentary analysis, and quantitative data such as statistical information from the analysis. Time horizons. Since the proposed research will conduct this study with the given time, that is contemporary disaster risk governance structure in Sri Lanka, the time horizon would be cross-sectional. Research techniques. This research proposes mixed method as the research choice based on the requirement of the multiple data. Further, it will use a variety of techniques, in-depth interviews, documentary analysis, observations, and statistical information. Accordingly, this research will triangulate multiple sources of data to guarantee the accuracy of the results. This is the references or the bibliography I have referred. Thank you, and welcome your comments and inputs, especially for developing this proposal. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mahesh, for the very interesting presentation. Do you have any questions for Mahesh or any feedback? Any questions for Mahesh? Okay, let me ask one question, Mahesh. What are the specific problems in the current governance structure in Sri Lanka? And also in relation to accountability, what are the key problems that you have identified within the Sri Lankan context? Mahesh, are you there? I think you are muted. Hello, Mahesh. Can you hear me?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you now. Yeah.
Sorry for the disturbance. Samindi, can you ask the question again, please?
Question was around the current problems that we have in the Sri Lanka in relation to the governance structure. Can you explain, like, what are the key problems that we have in in Sri Lanka?
Actually, Samindi, the main problem in regard to disaster governance is shared responsibilities among the institutions and the different layers of governance. For example, central government, the provincial governments, and the local governments are involved with the governance process. So each institution is trying to, give the responsibility to the other organization or the institution. So no one is not taking responsibility. That is one issue. And if we talk about the political context, there are a lot of personal political agendas are working around. So even the disaster governance process has been politicized to a certain extent. For example, now Sri Lanka is facing a lot of technical and financial issues in introducing new governance structures or mechanisms, method in governance process. That sort of issues are there, but my focus is basically about what the governance structures. For example, central government, provincial and local government are dealing with this governance process, and what are the institutional legal frameworks and how these legal and institutional frameworks work with the governance, and how the personalities like officials, they are the people who carry out these operationalizing the policies and frameworks, and the politicians who actually are responsible for making laws and frameworks and all. At the end point, the stakeholders or the receivers of these services.
Thank you, Mahesh. Thank you very much for that. And also, I think we don't have any further questions for Mahesh. We also have Ravi Sangapillai with us now. Ravi, are you there? Ravi, can you? Ravi, can you hear me?
Hello, Samindi.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, that one present by Mr. Rajkumar.
Oh, sorry, it was presented by Mr. Rajkumar, not you. We had 3 questions for that presentation. Would you be able to answer those Would you be able to answer the questions? Do you want me to go back to this? Sorry about that. It was presented by Mr. Rajkumar, our third presenter. We had 3 questions for the third presenter. Let me read out the first question. The first question is about what are the steps taken to prevent uncontrollable sand mining in the area, and what can we do in future to minimize the harmful impact?
Yes, there are 2 things we can do that, especially that non-structural measures we want to implement very perfectly. That non-structural measures mean the bottom to top, top to bottom. That's 2, the horizontal and vertical way. We want to given the awareness as well as that, especially for the law and order. Especially for the law and order should be implemented by the very specific way. That is the first thing what you are asking about, that is the main issues in that area. Whatever our research area, we have found that one, especially for the specific legal procedures and advocacies for the communities. The second thing, what are you asking?
The second question is from Noan. He says that it's a very interesting presentation and really pathetic situation. So he's asking whether you can explain or elaborate the criteria considered for issuance of permits.
Yes, you know that this area is one of the main development is very accelerated after post-war context. In that point, we must provide that sand. That is a very important, that should be, we want to do that. But the problem is we want to think about that criteria, specific criteria through the local government as well as the GSMB. They want to develop their specific criteria based on the need basis criteria we want to develop, because we are the not technical agency. The technical agency want to take a measures, that one.
Thanks, Ravi. The third question is from Bandula. He's asking, don't we go for low sand culture?
Sorry?
He's asking whether we can go for a low sand culture. That's how I understood the question. Bandula, are you there? Would you be able to elaborate your question if you are still around?
Low, sorry, say again that
low sand culture.
Low sand culture.
Yeah.
Low sand culture or low and culture?
I think Bandula is not around, so maybe we can skip that question, Ravi.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Ravi, for joining us. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, any other questions? Any final remarks or questions from anyone else? Okay, so we are now running out of time as well. So let me summarize the session now. We had 6 very interesting presentations in this session. We started with, we had 3 presentations around nature-based solutions, 3 very interesting presentations around nature-based solutions. And then Shavindra did the presentation about resilience properties, and then from there we moved on to Dhanushika. Dhanushika did a very interesting presentation on risk transfer insurance, and then finally it was Mahesh again did another interesting presentation about accountability and about the governance structure in disaster risk reduction. So we had 6 very interesting presentations in this session. Thank you very much to all the presenters. Thank you very much, and thank you very much all for participating in this session. Thank you.